Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome to the Airbus Beginners tutorial series. The aim of this series is to help get you in the air in the default Airbus A320 within Microsoft Flight Simulator and give you the required knowledge to simulate a flight from A to B within the sim. As the name would suggest, this series is very much aimed at people who are new to the Airbus, so we're not looking to learn every single system and procedure in minute detail. That being said, we will still try and follow real-world Airbus procedures as closely as possible. If you are looking for something a little bit more in-depth and a little bit more realistic, then please check out my other tutorial series on the channel, my Airbus Procedures tutorial series. Anyway, now let's head to the flight deck of the A320 and begin the lesson. So once again, welcome back to the flight deck of the default A320. If you remember from the last video, we're currently maintaining 11,000 feet, or actually flight level 110. We have about 50 track miles to run to Nice, and for this part of the video we're going to carry out the approach and landing onto ILS 04 left. We've cleared most of the high terrain now. There are still some hills out to the southeast, and you can see the French coastline just ahead of us. Anyway, we'll continue our descent now down to 4,000 feet for the ILS 04 left into Nice. So that's VS minus 500 and flight level 40. Currently the altimeter is set at standard QNH of 1013. We'll set the QNH now for Nice. So QNH in Nice is 1012. We can adjust between inches of mercury and hectopascals by clicking on this black knob, and then we'll set QNH 1012. And at 10,000 feet the aircraft speed will reduce to 250 knots. Currently with VS, the VS takes priority over the speed, so if we were doing a high VS then the aircraft might not actually decelerate correctly. So we'll go into a open descent, and that now allows the speed to take priority over the descent rate. So when the aircraft decelerates it will come back to 250 knots before descending any further. So there's 10,000 feet. You can see now the speed bug has come back to 250 knots. Turn the landing lights on. 10,000 feet, that means we need 40 track miles to run. As you can see, we have about 40 miles at the moment. And we can turn LS on. That gives us a display on the PFD of the ILS, so we have the localizer scale along the bottom and the glide slope scale along the side. And at some point when we get closer to Nice we'll see the ILS identifier in the bottom left hand corner of the PFD. That will show us that we are flying the correct ILS. Although again, being the simulator, we know it will be the correct ILS. So now 9,000 feet, we need 36 miles to run. Still looking pretty good there. So to fly the approach, the first thing we need to do is make sure we have the approach set in the box, and we do. We have ILS 04 left. We need to activate the approach phase. That'll put the aircraft into the approach phase, and that's for the ILS 04 left. By going into the approach phase, the aircraft speed is now based on the configuration of the aircraft, so should maintain green dot for now, and then as we take flap it will slowly reduce to S speed, F speed, and then ultimately the aircraft's approach speed. I will just say now the aircraft is again quite buggy here. The green dot and the flap speed limits and the S and F speeds, they're all wrong. Again, a bit complicated to explain for this tutorial. I'll explain it maybe at a later tutorial. But we'll just use selected speed for now. So I would suggest green dot initially, so that's 220 knots at the moment. because we've increased the speed, the aircraft's descent rate is now increasing as well. And again, we're getting a touch low, so we'll go back into VS. And we'll come back to around 1,000 feet a minute. So 7,000 feet, we need 28 miles, currently at 30. So we're actually not that far off profile. You can see we now need about 1,300 feet a minute to maintain profile. So we'll go 1,300 feet a minute. And usually we want to start configuring taking flaps around 20 nautical miles from the airport. So it's 1,000 feet to go, 4,000 blue, and we've got VS minus 1,000. 5,000 feet means we need about 20 miles to run. We've got about 30. So again, we're still low, but that's what we want for the moment. We'll start reducing the speed now. Come back to 180 knots. Once again, this is all a bit more conservative than we would be in the real world. And the ILS actually starts at 4,000 feet, so we'll just maintain 4,000 feet until we capture the ILS. So we're below the flap speed limit now, we'll take flaps 1. Not picking up the ILS yet, we probably should be, but we'll check. It is correctly tuned, so we'll just have to wait. It may just be that it's still being blocked by the hills at the moment. There we go, so we've got the ILS now. So November India, that is the identifier for the ILS, and that is what we have on the chart. Gives you the frequency and the distance as well, which is quite nice. So we actually can start managing our descent quite accurately now based on this distance. So 4,000 feet, should start our descent at 16 miles. And for the 3-degree glide slope, which is what we're flying on the ILS, 4,000 feet, that would be starting our descent at 12 miles. So we'll imagine now that we are under radar vectors from air traffic control. We're currently on a heading of 070. And once we're cleared for the ILS, we will arm the approach. So we'll say that we are now cleared for the ILS. I would just say though, with the default A320, it's worth waiting until you're quite close to the localizer to arm the approach. Otherwise it does some very strange things. So for now we'll leave the aircraft in heading. Once we see the localizer move, we'll arm the approach. So there's the localizer moving. All we need to do to fly the ILS approach is press the approach push button. Should go into localizer. Not quite accurate there, we should see loc on the FMA. We have glide slope blue, which means it will intercept the glide slope. Hopefully it will follow the localizer as it should. So we'll maintain 180 knots until about 7 miles, then we'll fly 160 knots until 4 miles. That's pretty realistic. Just before we intercept the glide slope, we'll select flaps 2. And you can already see the airfield ahead of us. So once again, this should say loc, not heading. Not sure why it's done that. But it does seem to be flying accurately at least. So there's glide slope. The aircraft will now follow the glide slope. Just reduce the speed slightly to prevent us overspeeding the flaps. So keeping an eye on the track miles to the runway. Around 8 nautical miles or 2,500 feet we'll take the gear down. So gear down. When we select gear down we arm the spoilers. Now we can turn on the runway turn off and the nose wheel taxi light.
2,500.
Keep bringing the speed back, we'll come back to 160 knots now. And as the speed reduces we can take flaps 3. And flaps full. So the aircraft is now configured for the landing. The only thing left for us to do is push for managed speed. We always try and fly the approach with managed speed. There are various reasons for that, but I won't go into them today. That will now allow the aircraft to decelerate back to our V approach speed. So 1,000 feet, we check that we are stable, so the aircraft is configured for the landing, the speed is managed, and we are on the profile. And we'll disconnect the autopilot. So flying the aircraft manually now.
500.
That's checked. Flight director's not really doing a very good job there. Getting slightly high on the profile.
400. 300.
And coming back on profile now.
200. 100.
Aiming for the touchdown zone. Beginning to flare.
30. 20.
Cutting the thrust.
Retard. 5.
Finding the runway. Okay, there's touchdown. Using the rudder to keep the aircraft straight. We use idle reverse. Pretty usual to use idle reverse, we rarely use full reverse. I'm not touching the brakes at the moment, the aircraft's auto braking. And we'll start manually braking now to come off at the second high speed exit. Through 70 knots. Once we're down to a slow speed we can cancel the reverse thrust. And then just using the rudder pedals to exit the runway. You always want to try and minimise your time on the runway as much as possible. You don't want to be braking heavily just for the sake of slowing down. Obviously the longer you're on the runway the more likelihood there is of someone having to do a go around behind you. So we'll taxi clear of the runway. Usually we'd start taxiing straight to the bay, however we'll just briefly park here. So bringing the aircraft to a stop and setting the parking brake. And we'll stop the video here for now. We'll come back in the final part of the series for the taxi in and shutdown procedures. So I do hope you enjoyed the video guys and found it informative. If you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. That really helps the channel to grow and I really appreciate the support. If you have any comments or questions for me, please leave them down in the comments section below and I'll do my best to answer them. But for now, thanks very much and I'll see you all again soon.